Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm Dr. Russell Sharp, and today we're talking about a plant that doesn't normally need soil anyway to grow. It doesn't have any roots, and that's because we're talking about growing moss hydroponically, which can be done. But you might think, why would you want to? Yesterday's podcast was all about weeds, and moss is a massive problem in lawns, but it's also grown for a number of different reasons. And so we'll talk about that today. So we'll delve into some innovative projects to growing moss. As we say, mosses lack true roots and instead absorb moisture directly from the environment, making them ideal candidates for hydroponic-like cultivation. Instead of soil, they thrive on moisture-retentive surfaces under controlled humidity and lighting, perfect for indoor farming setups. Okay, so there is one standout project or system or operation that's looked at growing moss hydroponically, and that is the Moss in Prisons project, which was part of a wider Sustainability in Prisons project, SPP. I think this is in North America, and they aimed at providing incarcerated individuals with therapeutic science-based learning, and they got the prisoners to look at different ways to grow the moss, the best species to grow the moss, how quickly the moss grew, the growth rates and things like this. Because there's two things here that prisoners and moss have in common, and that's that moss grows really slowly, and prisoners, especially in American prisons, have got a lot of time on their hands, and so they make the perfect candidates for studying moss growth. And so this was like a match made in heaven. So some ecologists got prisoners to study moss, and there's some great pictures on the internet of like these gang members with all tattoos, all like with a load of books about mosses and like with loads of moss around them on you call them a refractory table and stuff like that. So really interesting project. And the reason they were doing it was to try and stem wild moss cultivation and look at more sustainable ways of growing moss. And why is wild moss harvesting a problem? Well, moss isn't grown in farms. It's basically stripped from delicate ecosystems, especially in places like Canada and I believe Falkland Isles as well. And these delicate ecosystems, they're crucial. The moss is crucial for moisture retention and providing habitat for microfauna and other important plant species or rare plant species like carnivorous plants, sundews and things like this that grow in the bog-like systems. The moss also helps regulate soil temperature and humidity in forests and wetlands. And moss grows back in these systems, but very slowly. So it can take decades to regenerate after disturbance. And if you're harvesting the peat as well as the moss, then obviously you're releasing CO2 and a big carbon sink from there. So why would you want to grow moss in the first place? Is there a big market for it? Well, it's used a lot in aquascaping and terrariums. Enthusiasts maintain moss in hydroponic moss poles for houseplants. So if you're growing a Swiss cheese plant, a monstera or a philodendron, then you would grow them up a moss pole and water the moss pole. Terrariums, things like this. Living walls and biophilic design. So green walls that you find in high-end banks and solicitors' offices in the City of London or Wall Street or Manhattan may contain a lot of moss. And also in like air purifiers, a lot of air purifiers now contain moss. And like eco ones that you can grow the moss in your house, especially sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is like the one that grows in boggy conditions. And I've tried to grow sphagnum moss hydroponically with some degree of success in the past. There's only one place in Leicestershire where I'm based that contains that where sphagnum grows, and it's called Colville. And Colville has a grow shop. So shout out to Colville. Is it Colville Hydroponic Suppliers or something like that? So yeah, I've been to Colville a few times to study their rare moss species, but it's the sort of moss that you use in air purifiers. They grow in bogs and things like that. We said wild moss harvesting is a problem. Other end-use applications are air purifying, water purifying as well. So if you're looking to certain water purification systems might might currently use moss or in the future could use moss. It can be used as insulation once it's dried out, and packaging. So it could potentially be used as a packaging, moss dried mats, eco-friendly insulation, biodegradable packaging and things like this. So there are loads of end uses of moss that some of them might be high value, some of them might be low value. And remember, scientists have only scratched the surface when it comes to the biochemistry of plants and their uses. So there could be loads of interesting biochemistry in mosses. There are a lot of purple sphagnum mosses, and the pigments in them will be very different to the pink pigments in most plants because they're completely unrelated to all the seed plants, the flowering plants. These are what some people term not prehistoric plants, but I've forgotten the word for them. Nope, my mind's gone blank. So what are the problems with cultivating hydroponics? Moss, you need an inert media, you need something to hold them. They're not going to be rooting, so you don't need to worry about that. You are going to need to maintain a high humidity, misting, but they will suffer from fungal diseases. So you're going to have to do a delicate balance, humidity control, peroxide levels, misting, other things like this could sterilize it, UV levels. Lighting, you want really low to medium lights because no intense direct sunlight. Moss does not like high temperatures, high light levels. It will bleach and go white if it gets really high light levels. As I say, you want a sterile environment. It's slow growing, and it's not just the fungal diseases that are going to, like mildew, are going to be a problem. You're also going to get like bacteria and algae growing on it. And that's one of the big challenges of growing an aquatic plant in hydroponics is you get algae growing on it. So you want a way of controlling that algae without actually killing the plant. So it's going to be growing over the foliage. And most hydroponic crops, algae is not growing over the foliage, whereas in moss it is. And then harvesting, how are you going to harvest it? Obviously gentle trimming to avoid disrupting the moss integrity. And if you were looking to, grow moss hydroponically for packaging and insulation, then you'd have to do this at absolute scale. So you would need an automatic moss harvester and system, which shouldn't be too bad because you haven't got any growing media. So, it's not beyond the wit of man to actually think up a system where you could grow moss hydroponically and automatically harvest it. I've just thought of the word as well, and I promise I haven't Googled it. It's primitive plants. A lot of people refer to mosses and liverworts and ferns as primitive plants, whereas some scientists think this is not an accurate description. They just haven't evolved recently. I like to call them primitive plants. So, as I say, I've tried to grow them previously. I found that the algae, the foliar fungal diseases were the biggest issue. But, some of these prisoners I've managed to do it in the, Moss in Prisons project. There are no commercial moss cultivators in hydroponics. So if you do think you want to have a play with it, there is a blue ocean of business opportunities there because nobody else is cultivating moss hydroponically. I don't think anyone else has looked at it. Okay. Certainly it would be a good one to get investors and grants, especially. You could harvest up a load of government grants in the UK or especially in Scotland for this. They'd love to give out grants for this sort of thing. It offers a sustainable and ethical alternative to wild harvesting with applications in range from all sorts of crazy biophilic designs to environmental remediation to packaging to even when you grow hanging baskets, ornamental hanging baskets, the outer layer is often stuffed full of sphagnum moss. And so that's a big user of sphagnum moss. Nowadays, hanging baskets have plastic lining. It doesn't look as good as sphagnum moss. So if you could grow sphagnum moss sustainably and at a good cost, then there would be a market there from a lot of horticultural nurseries for it. So it's an exciting frontier, blending plant biology with modern indoor farming technology. So thanks for joining me, Dr. Russell Sharp, the inventor of liquid gold, as we call it in the UK, or gold leaf in the US. If you want to play around with growing moss with gold leaf or liquid gold, then more than happy to help you and give you some advice. And if you want any other products that you think might be useful for growing moss, then get in touch with me. Thank you very much. Stay curious, stay green. Until tomorrow, we'll have another wacky episode with some crazy tech. That's everything for Hydroponics Daily. Thank you very much. Goodbye.